In this lesson, we'll look at basic lists. There's quite a lot we can do with Android lists, like customizing the list items, making sublists, and even two-dimensional lists called a grid. So we'll be spending the next few lessons working with them. We'll start with the basics, of course. The base widget of all lists except the grid is the list view. In this example, our entire screen is going to be a list. You can use this pattern for a switchboard screen, with each list item representing an activity the user can navigate to. I've created 3 child activities that don't do much except label themselves. So this is the layout of the child activity, and I'm using the same layout for all 3 of them. And here's the child activity code, and all it does is set the text of that text view to its particular type. So it's going to show it to be activity 1. Activity 2 does exactly the same thing as does activity 3. The main activity is where we're going to have our list. Now the first thing you'll notice is I didn't show you the layout. And in fact, we're not setting our content view to that layout. There is no layout for this form because this activity descends from list activity, which means it has its own built-in list view layout. So we don't have to deal with a layout for a very simple list like this. So the second thing we want to do is we actually want to populate the list with items. And for this kind of list, we can basically use strings and not a lot more, and we'll see how to customize things in future lessons. But for now, we're going to have some strings, and it's going to be activity 1, activity 2, activity 3, and finally an exit. And then we're going to create an array adapter, and it's going to be of type string, which jibes with our items. And the array adapter wants a context, which is going to be this activity. And it also wants a resource ID. And we're going to be using a built-in Android resource ID, the Android resource layout simple list item. And then we pass in the actual string array into that resource and adapter. And finally, we set this form's list adapter equal to our new array adapter. Now again, this activity descends from list activity, so it does have this property. If you forget and don't change this inheritance from the regular activity, this won't compile. Then finally, of course, we actually want to see what item the user clicks, because we're going to want to start the activity that corresponds to the click. Again, we have a onList item click, and that's a member of the list activity. So we have an override for that. And within the parameters, there is a position parameter. It's just basically the list index, 0-based of course. And we're going to, for the first item, start our activity 1. And we've talked about how to start an activity briefly before, and of course we'll get more into activities and intents later on in the course. So for the first 3 choices, we're going to start the activity 1, 2, and 3. And then finally, for the last choice, we're going to do a thing called finish. We haven't really talked about this, but a finish is essentially a close. It's a little bit of a suggestion though. It would appear that the application is actually fully closed when I click this exit button, but in fact it's still in memory, and you'll actually see it in the debugger will not have stopped. Android will close an application when the garbage collection comes around and determines that the application is indeed fully suspended and should be closed, but it won't necessarily close it immediately when I select this finish. So let's run it and see what we ended up with. So here's our little switchboard. And if I click the activity 1 choice, it lights up, and then we go into activity 1. Likewise, activity 2, 3, and finally the exit. and the exit does appear to have closed the application, but you'll note that I'm still debugging. And it's not until I actually physically stop it that the application is indeed truly closed. So that's a very basic list. Next we'll look at the first building block of more complex lists, the simple list adapter.